If you want to change the world, you must begin not with noise, but with noticing. Not with shouting, but with listening. Not with dominance, but with understanding. Because people are not problems to solve. They are stories waiting to be heard. And until you can hear the quiet ache beneath their words, you are not leading, you are only performing. True influence does not begin with charisma. It begins with compassion. It begins with the rare ability to look beyond the surface, beyond the behavior, beyond the defenses, and see the human being underneath. The ones who yell the loudest are often the most afraid. The ones who withdraw the most often feel the most forgotten. The people who seem the hardest to love are usually the ones who need it the most. But most never slow down long enough to see that. We are taught to win, to compete, to posture, but not to understand. And that is why the world feels so disconnected. Everyone is trying to be interesting. No one is trying to be interested. Everyone wants to be heard. Few want to listen. But as Dale Carnegie once said, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. That isn't a quote. That is a doorway, a spiritual law. The way to a person's heart is not paved with performance, but with presence. And if you want to move someone, really move them, you must first meet them as they are, where they are, without agenda, without ego, without the need to fix, change, or impress. Just be there. And that act alone, in a world obsessed with self, is revolutionary. You don't need a title to change someone's life. You just need to pay attention. The way someone's voice cracks when they say they're fine. The way their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. The way they hesitate before answering a question you didn't even know was heavy. These are sacred signals, invitations, clues that say, see me even when I'm silent. And when you see someone, really see them without judgment, without comparison, without turning their pain into a competition. You give them the greatest gift we can offer each other, the dignity of being understood. This world doesn't need more critics. It doesn't need more influencers. It doesn't need more noise. It needs witnesses. People who are willing to witness each other's humanity without rushing to change it, without needing to label it, without needing to fix it, to make themselves feel superior. Because real power is not in correcting others, it's in connecting with them. You will never know the weight someone is carrying by looking at the bags under their eyes. You will never know what someone is surviving by analyzing their productivity. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it dresses well. Sometimes it shows up on time and meets deadlines. And sometimes the strongest people you know are carrying battles you couldn't survive a day of. Never trust the people who tell you other people's secrets, because if they dishonor someone else's story for entertainment, they will do the same to yours. Understanding begins with trust, and trust is built in silence, in patience, in the sacred space between two people who have no need to perform for one another. That space is rare, and that rarity is what makes it powerful. If you want to change the world, build more of those spaces, where people feel seen, where they don't have to hide their truth, where being understood is more important than being impressive. Because when people feel safe, they change not by force, but by choice. Not because they were pressured, but because they were heard. Success hugs you in private, but so does healing, so does kindness, so does kind understanding. The most important things we do for each other are often the ones no one else will ever know about. The hand you held, the silence you respected, the forgiveness you offered, the grace you gave without being asked. These moments build a world far stronger than any headline ever will. If you want to be a leader, understand people. If you want to be a healer, understand people. If you want to build a life that leaves behind more than just numbers, understand people. Understand that people rarely say what they mean the first time, that anger is often fear in disguise, that silence is not always peace, it can be grief or shame or the absence of permission to speak. Understand that behavior is a language, and those who listen without judgment often hear what most people miss. Understand that not everyone needs your advice. Most people don't want to be fixed, they want to be felt. Feel them. Feel the exhaustion behind the ambition. Feel the loneliness beneath the charm. Feel the ache behind the sarcasm. And once you feel it, don't fill it with noise. Just honor it. Your presence is enough. We think changing the world means changing systems, structures, governments. And yes, those matter. But the deepest revolutions happen one conversation at a time, one person at a time, one moment of true understanding at a time. Because when someone feels truly understood, they soften, they open, they breathe. And in that breath, transformation begins. And as that breath deepens, something ancient begins to stir inside them, something that has long waited to be seen without being judged, touched without being broken, heard without being interrupted. In that single moment of understanding, you do more than change their mind. You remind them of their humanity. You remind them of their worth. You remind them that they were never alone, just unheard. And this is how the world begins to heal. Not by arguing louder, but by listening deeper. Not by winning debates, but by holding space. Not by overpowering, but by understanding. Because people don't change when they feel attacked. They change when they feel safe. They open when they feel seen. They grow when they feel respected. And this kind of change cannot be bought, marketed, or forced. It must be earned through presence, through patience, through the long, slow work of paying attention. But most people aren't patient enough to listen past the noise. They judge too quickly. They correct too early. They interrupt too often. And in doing so, they miss the treasure buried under the mess. They miss the truth beneath the reaction. They miss the soft voice trying to whisper beneath the shouting. Understanding means you slow down. You look beyond the moment. You see not just what's happening, but why it's happening. And in that seeing, you become powerful. Because now, you're not reacting, you're responding. You're not fighting, you're guiding. You're not defending your ego, you're connecting from your soul. And there's nothing more powerful than that. It takes no strength to argue. It takes strength to listen, to breathe through offense, to hear what someone meant, even when they failed to say it kindly. That's what real maturity is. Not how fast you can clap back, but how deeply you can understand without needing to win. You want to be respected? Understand people. You want to lead with integrity. Understand people. You want to live a life that matters not just to your bank account, but to the beating hearts around you. Understand people, not from books, not from theories, but from your own willingness to feel what they feel, to stand where they stand, to see what they see. That kind of understanding doesn't come from study. It comes from empathy. And empathy is a mirror. It reflects not only their pain, but your own. And maybe that's why so many avoid it, because to understand someone else, you must first understand yourself. You must confront your projections. You must heal your triggers. You must ask, what part of me reacts so violently to the weakness of others? What pain am I avoiding that makes me punish the vulnerability I see in them? This is the work, the real work, and it's not glamorous. It's not fast, but it is the foundation of every great relationship, every lasting connection, every meaningful life. Because the world doesn't change when we demand more. It changes when we understand better. You will meet people who are bitter, closed, arrogant, cruel. Don't respond with your ego. Respond with your wisdom. Ask yourself, what would lead someone to become this guarded? What wound are they hiding? Not to excuse the behavior, but to see it clearly, to respond wisely. Because not everyone deserves your reaction, but everyone reveals something if you're willing to look deeper. You begin to live differently when you no longer take things personally. When you realize most people's cruelty is not a reflection of you, but of their own suffering, their impatience, their rudeness, their coldness. It's often unprocessed pain. Hurt people, but understood people heal people. So, be the healer, not with sermons, not with speeches, but with sincerity, with steadiness, with the rare ability to say, I see you, and I won't treat you like your worst moment. I will treat you like the human underneath it. And that choice, that simple, silent choice, it shifts something in the atmosphere. People remember how you made them feel. They may forget your words, your name, your position, but they will never forget your energy, the moment they felt safe in your presence, the moment they felt unjudged, the moment they were allowed to be real without fear. Do that enough times, and you change everything. Because when people feel seen, they stop hiding. When they stop hiding, they start healing. When they start healing, they begin to rise. And when people rise, the world rises with them. So, if you truly want to change the world, don't look for the spotlight. Look for the soul. Don't seek control. Seek connection. Don't ask, how can I fix this? Ask, how can I understand this? And when you do, you'll see that the power to change the world has been in your hands all along. It was never in the loudest voice. It was always in the quietest truth. I see you. Because I see you is not just a sentence. It's salvation. It is the oxygen that unlatches years of quiet suffocation. It is the light that touches the parts of a person they thought would never be reached. And you must understand this: some people are alive today because someone finally saw them. Not fixed, not analyzed, just saw. The world is not starved for answers. It is starved for presence. For the kind of attention that says, you don't need to earn my respect. You already have it because you're human. But most people don't know how to offer that kind of attention because they've never received it. They've been raised on performance, on comparison, on the idea that worth must be proved. So they try to matter by being louder, richer, smarter. But all along, what they really wanted was to be understood, to be valued without needing to shine, to be embraced even when they faltered. And this is why your understanding becomes a lifeline note, because you are perfect, but because you are present. Think about Ethau often has your soul ached, not for advice, but for understanding. How many times did you wish someone would stop trying to fix you and just sit beside you in silence? Not with solutions, but with sincerity. Not with judgment, but with gentleness. That moment, the one you were never given, becomes your ministry to the world. What you lacked becomes what you offer. What you needed becomes what you deliver. And that is what transforms POP, not expertise, but empathy. Not having all the answers, but asking the right questions. How are you, really? What's been weighing on your heart? Where does it hurt? What do you need, but don't know how to ask for? Most people won't answer right away. They'll shrug. They'll deflect. They'll say they're fine. Not because they are, but because they're afraid you won't stay if you see their wounds. But if you stay long enough, quietly, consistently, without flinching, you'll see them unravel. And in that unraveling, they'll begin to return to themselves. Because understanding isn't about knowing, it's about allowing. Allowing someone to be as they are, confused, angry, grieving, guarded. Allowing them to say the wrong thing without punishment. to not know what they feel yet, to not have the words, to still be figuring it out. When you create that kind of space, it's not just therapeutic, it's liberating. And the irony? Once people feel understood, they change faster than when they were forced. Understanding removes resistance. It says, "You're safe here." And safety is the foundation of transformation. But this kind of understanding requires one thing above all: the death of ego. Because ego wants to fix. Ego wants to win. Ego wants to be right. Understanding wants to connect. Understanding says, "My need to be right is not greater than your need to be heard." Understanding says, "I don't need to agree to respect you." Understanding says, "I will not define you by your weakest moment." And that level of grace, that level of depth, that level of emotional maturity, it is rare. But when you embody it, your presence becomes sacred. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. People feel safer around you, even if they don't know why. Because your energy is no longer a threat, it's an invitation. And invitations are what this world desperately needs. Because people are dying behind smiles, behind promotions, behind curated lives. People are starving for connection in rooms full of applause. They're drowning in their own silence. And one moment of true understanding, one moment of being seen, can give them the courage to keep going. So, if you want to change the world, stop trying to impress it. Start trying to understand it. Stop debating people's worth. Start witnessing their pain. Stop needing to be right. Start choosing to be kind. Because it is better to be kind and walk away misunderstood than to be right and leave another person more broken than you found them. That is power. That is wisdom. That is leadership. That is legacy. The truth is, anyone can speak. Anyone can argue. But few can understand. Few can soften their pride long enough to hear the truth inside another's trembling voice. Few can listen with both ears and no agenda. Few can make another human feel like they finally belong, not because they earned it, but because they already do. And that's where the real change happens. Not on stages, not in headlines, but in hearts. One by one. You want to change the world? Start with one. Start with the one person no one sees. Start with the one no one listens to. Start with the one who's hard to love. Start with yourself. Because if you can understand your own wounds, you'll stop projecting them onto others. If you can understand your own triggers, you'll stop punishing people who hit them. If you can understand your own fears, you'll stop needing to control everyone else's behavior. And once you master that, you become someone who carries peace wherever they go. Not because life gets easier, but because you've become the kind of person who brings clarity into chaos just by listening. And when the world meets that kind of presence, it cannot stay the same. Because something begins to heal. Something begins to shift. Something begins to rise. One person at a time. And that person can be you. And when you become that kind of person, someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard, doesn't need to win to be respected, doesn't need to change others to feel valuable. You're not just living, you're awakening. You no longer carry the need to prove anything. Because in your silence, in your sincere presence, you are already healing, not through grand speeches, but through wholehearted listening. Not by drawing attention to yourself, but by offering it to others. And the world begins to change quietly, steadily. Not because you have power, but because you have compassion. Not because you're perfect, but because you are real. People will begin to come to you, not because you have the best advice, but because with you, they no longer feel the need to wear a mask. Around you, they feel like they can breathe again, like they can be who they truly are. And in a world where everyone is trying so hard to be someone else, allowing someone the freedom to just be is a revolutionary act. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will meet you at the same depth. Some will take your understanding for granted. Some will confuse your compassion for weakness. But you will learn this. Not reacting does not mean you lack strength. It means you've learned to protect it. You don't need to respond to every insult. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to prove yourself in every interaction. When you understand people, you understand that sometimes the last thing they need is another debate. Sometimes what they need is silence, a compassionate gaze, a moment without judgment. Because people don't change through confrontation, they change through connection. Through being seen without being controlled, through being heard without being corrected, through being allowed to exist in a space where their most fragile truths are not crushed but honored. And if you can create that space even once, even for one person, you will have done something the world has rarely done well. You will have understood not to dominate, not to manipulate, not to win, but to love, to heal, to connect. If you truly want to change the world, you won't do it by shouting louder. You'll do it by listening deeper, not by overpowering, but by understanding, not by pushing people to be like you, but by making room for them to be who they are. Because the world doesn't need more leaders, it needs more listeners. And that listener, that bridge builder, that healing presence can begin with you. And when you carry that kind of presence into the world, rooted in quiet understanding rather than control, you don't just shift conversations, you shift environments. People feel it before you speak, before you explain. Your energy enters the room first, and if your thoughts are calm, if your heart is clean, if your intention is pure, it becomes undeniable, not through performance, but through peace. You become the one others look to when things fall apart, not because you have all the answers, but because you don't panic, because you hold space, because your understanding creates gravity in a world full of noise. That kind of gravity cannot be faked. It can only come from doing the work within. Understanding people is not about becoming a sponge for their suffering. It's about becoming a mirror for their truth, reflecting back to them the parts they forgot, the beauty they buried, the worth they traded away just to survive. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to say, "You don't have to prove anything to me. You don't have to be strong here. I see you already, and that's enough." That moment can break years of silence. That moment can undo decades of shame. That moment can open a heart that has been locked for far too long. But you cannot offer that to others until you offer it to yourself. You cannot understand people if you do not understand yourself. You must know the landscapes of your own emotions, the storms you've survived, the walls you've built, the wounds you've hidden under achievement. Because if you don't understand your own defense mechanisms, you'll punish others for theirs. You'll see weakness and call it failure. You'll see silence and label it disinterest. You'll see a guarded heart and think it's rejection, when really, it's just someone who hasn't felt safe in years. This is why emotional maturity is the cornerstone of world-changing presence. You don't just react to people's words, you read their energy. You look beneath the sentence, beneath the behavior, and you ask yourself, what part of this person is still hurting? And what would it look like to meet that pain with empathy instead of ego? This doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. This doesn't mean you excuse harm. Understanding is not the same as accepting toxic behavior. It means you see the root clearly and you choose your response with intention. Sometimes, understanding people means walking away with grace instead of staying in confusion. Sometimes, it means setting boundaries without hatred. Sometimes, it means loving someone from a distance while keeping your soul intact. Because the more you understand people, the more you realize not everyone is meant to walk with you. Some are teachers in disguise. Some are mirrors. Some are reminders of what you've outgrown. But all of them, in some way, help you see yourself more clearly if you're willing to look with courage. Understanding gives you that courage to stay when it's right, to leave when it's time, to speak when it matters, to be silent when the noise no longer deserves your breath. And when you live this way, you become different. You begin to see beyond the surface of every interaction. You stop asking, "What's wrong with them?" and start wondering, "What have they been through?" You stop assuming people's choices are personal and begin to see the long thread of pain, confusion, and fear that shapes so many behaviors. You become slower to judge, quicker to listen, softer in tone, clearer in action, and you realize this is what real strength feels like. Not volume, not dominance, not control, but stillness, discernment, the ability to understand people deeply without letting their chaos disturb your peace. And your peace, that sacred inner clarity, becomes your service to the world. Because now, you no longer walk into rooms asking, "How can I be impressive?" You walk in wondering, "How can I make someone feel less alone today?" And that shift, that sacred, silent shift is what makes you powerful beyond anything you can measure. Because changing the world doesn't begin with grand plans. It begins with seeing people, really seeing them, not as roles, not as labels, not as threats, but as human, as sacred, as worthy of being understood. And when you begin to see others as sacred, something inside you softens, something ancient, something wise. You stop measuring people by what they can do for you. You stop ranking them by status, performance, opinion. You begin to experience them as they are. Imperfect, yearning, alive. Not projects, not problems, but souls. Each carrying the invisible weight of unseen battles. Each with a story that shaped their tenderness, their silence, their rage. And you, because you have chosen to understand, become the first to recognize it. You become the quiet witness in a noisy world. The one who doesn't need to be right to be effective. The one who doesn't need control to be steady. The one who has no need to shout because your presence already speaks. There is a different kind of influence that rises when you no longer seek approval, when you no longer crave validation from people who have not earned the right to define you. That kind of influence comes from alignment. From knowing yourself so well, you don't need to convince anyone else to agree with your truth. And from knowing others so deeply, you don't need to argue with their pain. You simply offer what most never learn to give: space, stillness, safety. That kind of person, quietly grounded, inwardly stable, outwardly kind, can walk into chaos and bring calm, can listen to rage and not absorb it, can hold a mirror without distortion, and can stand in a storm, not untouched, but unmoved. This is the power of understanding people. You learn that you do not need to fix them to love them. That sometimes the most healing thing you can do is let someone be. That the desire to fix is often disguised fear, and the courage to understand is the willingness to stand in the mystery of another person's soul without needing to master it. You begin to see the tragedy in always trying to change others. You begin to see the beauty in letting them unfold. You begin to see that true transformation never comes from pressure, it comes from permission. Permission to feel, to cry, to be unsure, to fail, to ask for help, to say, "I don't know who I am right now," and not be abandoned for it. And if you can be the person who grants that permission, even once, even in passing, then you have changed the world. Because the world doesn't change through laws alone. It doesn't change through trends or opinions or viral noise. It changes through energy. Through the moment someone feels safe enough to drop the mask, to tell the truth, to breathe for the first time in years. And that kind of breath ripples. It moves through families, through friendships, through generations. Because once a person is understood, they no longer have to fight so hard to be seen. Once they are seen, they stop trying to prove their worth. Once they stop proving, they begin healing. And once they heal, they become the kind of person who understands others. And so it spreads, not like wildfire, but like light, quietly, gently, powerfully, because it only takes one person to change everything. One person who refuses to judge the surface. One person who chooses to ask better questions. One person who looks at a closed heart and whispers, "I'm still here." You can be that person, even when no one else is, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because empathy is not about ease, it's about choice. Choosing to stay soft when the world tells you to harden. Choosing to stay open when life begs you to shut down. Choosing to understand when everything in you wants to defend. And if you can live that way, if you can make understanding your posture instead of reaction, then even your presence becomes a quiet revolution. You don't need to be a leader of nations. You don't need to have a platform. You don't need to be followed by thousands. You only need to be human enough to care, human enough to pause, human enough to ask, "What if I'm wrong about them?" Human enough to say, "Tell me more." Human enough to sit in the space between words and listen for what was never said out loud. Because in that space, in that silence, in that sacred pause, is where all real change begins. And in that sacred pause, the walls begin to fall. The armor people wear, the sarcasm, the perfectionism, the defensiveness begins to loosen. Not because you pried it off, but because you didn't demand it be removed. You waited, you respected, you understood. And when someone feels that level of patience, they no longer fear being exposed, they start feeling accepted. Acceptance is not agreement. It is not compliance. It is not approval of every action. It is something far more rare. The ability to see someone in their entire tithe wounds, the wonder, the contradictions, and remain. Not because you must, but because you choose to. And in a world addicted to judgment, that choice is extraordinary. When you offer someone that level of acceptance, you give them a mirror they've never had. A mirror that doesn't distort their pain into weakness. A mirror that doesn't turn their flaws into shame. A mirror that reflects back the one truth we all need to believe deep in our bones. You are not too much, and you are not enough. You are human, and you are worthy of being seen. Most people don't believe that. Not really. They may say it. They may pretend. But their eyes reveal the deeper story, the one no one ever rewrote for them. The one filled with rejection, abandonment, ridicule, betrayal. The one that said, "You must perform to be loved. You must achieve to belong. You must never be too messy, too honest, too real." But understanding rewrites that storyline by line. You don't have to say anything profound. You just have to stay. You just have to witness without flinching. And suddenly, the narrative begins to unravel. Not through force, through presence. You may never hear them say it, but in their silence, something shifts. They trust a little more. They share a little deeper. They stand a little taller. Because finally, they've met someone who isn't afraid of their truth. And in that meeting, the world is already changing. Because no government, no law, no movement is stronger than one soul finally believing it is seen. That is the revolution, one understanding at a time. And it begins in you. But don't think this path is easy. Understanding people will stretch you. It will confront every place in you that still clings to superiority. It will break the illusion that you are more enlightened than the ones you judge. It will humble you. Because the more you understand people, the more you realize that you too have been misunderstood. You too have said things you didn't mean. You too have hurt people while trying to protect yourself. You too have built walls, worn masks, stayed silent out of fear. You too are human. And it is in owning that truth, your own fragile, glorious, imperfect humanity, that you find the ability to extend grace to others. Not fake grace, not performative tolerance, but the kind of grace that flows from someone who has wrestled with their own darkness and decided not to weaponize it against others. The kind of grace that says, I see your shadow and I will not run. Because running is easy. Condemning is easy. Labeling is easy. Understanding is sacred. It is slow. It is deliberate. It is hard. But it is holy. And if you choose it, if you keep choosing it, even when the world calls you soft, even when your ego begs you to shut down, you will start to walk differently, speak differently, love differently. You will become the kind of person people remember long after they forget your name, because of how they felt in your presence, because of what didn't need to be said, because of the quiet miracle of being understood, if only once, if only briefly. That is the legacy that matters. That is the influence that lasts. That is the mark you leave not on history books, but on human hearts. And if you want to change the world, start there. Start with one. Start with you.